Measles, mumps, rubella. Viral infections that can cause rashes, cold-like symptoms, headaches, fatigue, pain, and sometimes even death. Thankfully, due to modern medicine, it is now incredibly easy to stop these infections from occurring in the first place with the help of a vaccine. But is it possible that this vaccine could have sinister side effects? It was in the 20th century when leading American microbiologist Maurice Ralph Hilleman, who specialized in vaccinology, developed over 40 during the course of his career. These vaccines included measles, mumps, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, chickenpox, meningococcus, streptococcus pneumoniae, and Haemophilus influenza. During the Asian flu pandemic that originated in Hong Kong in 1957, 69,000 Americans lost their lives when the virus spread overseas. But thanks to Dr. Hilleman's research and development, he saved the lives of hundreds of thousands when he and his team worked tirelessly to identify the strain of the virus and was able to develop and distribute 40 million doses of their vaccine. Dr. Hilleman was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal from the American military for his work during this pandemic. He also played a role in a second 1968 Hong Kong flu pandemic, when he was able to develop a vaccine and distribute 9 million doses within just 4 months. He was also the first person to combine viral vaccines together, which led to the creation of the measles, mumps, and rubella combined vaccine in 1971, which became licensed for use in the US that same year. The vaccine was made publicly available to the UK in 1988 with the intent of completely eradicating measles and rubella from the British population. Dr. Hilleman worked for Merck Research Labs during the majority of his career until he retired at the age of 65, where he then went on to direct and advise the newly created Merck Institute for Vaccinology for the next 2 decades, as well as becoming a valued advisor to the World Health Organization before his tragic death in 2005. At the age of 85. His MMR vaccine is still used to this day around the world, with a dose typically being given to young children between the ages of 9 to 15 months, with a second dose administered between the ages of 15 months to 6 years. Before Dr. Hilleman's vaccination, measles was responsible for the deaths of 2.6 million people every year. But between the year 2000 and 2018, vaccination decreased measles deaths by a staggering 73%. As of 2023, there have only been 149 confirmed cases of measles in England, with another 41 in the United States across 18 jurisdictions. These numbers are now so low since the introduction of the MMR vaccine that the rare occurrences of cases that do still take place are often linked to less developed countries that do not have a vaccine schedule bringing the virus over from abroad, meaning that measles as a native viral infection in the UK and the United States rests firmly within the realms of completely eradicated. British physician Dr. Andrew Jeremy Wakefield was born in 1956, following in the footsteps of his parents, who both worked as doctors. He studied medicine at St Mary's Hospital Medical School in the UK, which is now known as the Imperial College School of Medicine, becoming fully qualified in 1981 and a fellow member of the Royal College of Surgeons in 85. His career took him overseas, where he became a member of a team studying tissue rejection problems with small intestine transplantation at the University of Toronto between 1986 and 89. He would then return to work in the UK on a liver transplant program developed by the Royal Free Hospital in London. In 1993, Wakefield received a lot of attention as he began to publish a series of reports theorizing a potential link between the measles virus and Crohn's disease. 2 years later, he published a paper in the Lancet now claiming that he had found a link between Crohn's disease and Dr. Hilleman's MMR vaccine. At this point, Wakefield had already established himself as a well-respected professional, senior lecturer and honorary consultant in experimental gastroenterology. But it was around this time when he was approached by Rosemary Kessick, a mother of a young boy that had diagnosed autism and was seeking help regarding her son's bowel problems. And this seems to be the event that caused Wakefield to suddenly redirect his research into a potential link between the MMR vaccine and autism. On February the 28th, 1998, Dr. Andrew Wakefield published a study into the Lancet that would shake up the very foundation of the entire scientific world. The study proposed a new syndrome called autistic enterocolitis and raised the possibility of a link between a novel form of bowel disease, autism, and the MMR vaccine. The published paper included the clinical studies of 12 children that had been diagnosed as having autism, 8 of which had what were described as behavioral symptoms that the parents associated with the MMR vaccine. He goes on to specify that the onset of these behavioral problems began within just 2 weeks of receiving the vaccination, and hypothesized that the vaccine itself was the primary trigger in 8 of the 12 children, with a 9th child's behavior being linked directly to the measles virus itself. The study became instantly controversial and gained worldwide publicity. Although Wakefield's study doesn't directly say that an actual connection was proven, he was noted as making press conference statements and video news report comments calling for suspension of the vaccine just prior to his study being published. It was his public press conference and statements that initially fueled the sudden fear of the MMR vaccine, as opposed to the actual study itself. Wakefield publicly took a decisive stance that all administrations of the MMR vaccine should cease immediately until further research into the link could be undertaken, causing a sharp decline in the use of the MMR vaccine and leading to several outbreaks of measles around the world. That same year, a group of British experts undertook subsequent research and investigated Wakefield's claims, and failed to confirm his hypothesis, concluding that the measles virus did not cause Crohn's disease or autism, and neither did the MMR vaccine. The Royal Free Hospital requested that Wakefield validate his published work with a controlled study, but he refused, instead resigning from his position in 2001 and moving to the United States. Many other researchers attempted to reproduce Wakefield's study, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Science, and even the UK's National Health Service, but none were able to replicate his findings. Now a resident of the United States, and despite the controversy, in 2004 Wakefield co-founded the Thoughtful House Research Center in Austin, Texas, with controversial American researcher Jeff Bradstreet to conduct further studies on the possible relationship between the MMR vaccine and autism. That same year, an investigation was undertaken by the Sunday Times, led by reporter Brian Deere, who was able to identify a staggering clash of interests not previously disclosed by Wakefield. Deere reported and provided evidence that some of the parents of the children in the 1998 study were recruited by UK lawyer Richard Barr, who was also in the process of looking for an expert witness to start a planned class action lawsuit regarding alleged vaccine damage. Barr hired Wakefield for £150 an hour plus expenses, and only then moved on to recruiting the 12 children for the study, actively seeking out parents of cases that might imply a connection between the vaccine and autism. This new partnership between Barr and Wakefield was then able to convince the UK's Legal Aid Board to provide financial support to the planned litigation proceedings. They received £55,000, which was then used to fund Wakefield's research. He himself received £400,000 from Barr to falsify his research and publish his study into the Lancet, bolstering his planned litigation case. It was during this research in 1997 that Wakefield also applied to the UK Patent Office for his own version of the MMR vaccine before his study had even been concluded. Putting him in a position to profit greatly from the upcoming MMR scare, he was making plans to develop and distribute his own safer version of the vaccine to the public, a venture that could have profited him many millions of pounds per year. Lancet editor Richard Horton publicly responded to the investigation and described Wakefield's research as fatally flawed, and that the peer-reviewed study would have been instantly rejected had his financial conflict of interests been known. 10 of Wakefield's 12 co-authors of the study retracted their support immediately, with researchers like Nicholas Chadwick, who was working under Wakefield at the time, admitting that the study had actually failed to find the measles virus in any of the children involved, with others testifying that Wakefield completely ignored laboratory data that conflicted with his predetermined hypothesis. This caused the general medical Council to conduct inquiries into Wakefield, and in 2010 found that he had acted against his patients' best interests and mistreated developmentally delayed children, failing in his duties as a consultant. The charges against Wakefield were investigated at a 217-day hearing and included being paid a large sum to heavily falsify the study, ordering investigations upon his research subjects including colonoscopies, colon biopsies and spinal taps without being qualified to undertake these procedures, not seeking the approval of his department's ethics board and acting in contrary to the children's clinical interests, failing to disclose how patients were recruited to the study, and purchasing blood samples for the study from children that were present at his own son's birthday party for £5 each. Wakefield's study was now heavily scrutinised, but even more so when further information began to come to light. 3 of the 9 children in the study that Wakefield reported to have regressive autism weren't even diagnosed, with only 1 of the 12 actually having regressive autism. Despite Wakefield claiming that all 12 children were previously normal, 5 had documented pre-existing developmental conditions. It was at this hearing that the patients were discovered to have been recruited through anti-MMR campaigners, and with the help of Richard Barr, he commissioned and funded the study for planned litigation proceedings that otherwise would have failed without the backing of a respected member of the medical community, a venture that everybody involved had planned to financially benefit from. It was at this point that Wakefield's study was concluded to have been an elaborate fraud, and he himself was considered a disgrace within the entire scientific community. The British Medical Journal released an article explaining how Wakefield had planned to capitalise on the MMR vaccination scare provoked by his own paper and planned to launch a venture that he would have profited from new medical diagnostic tools and litigation-driven testing, selling his own brand of testing kits to diagnose autistic enterocolitis, an unproven condition that Wakefield completely fabricated in his published paper, as well as profiting from his patented alternative vaccination option. It was estimated that this fraudulent venture could have potentially given him a staggering $43 million a year. Wakefield's study was officially retracted on February 2nd, 2010, citing the data had been falsified and that the Lancet themselves had been grossly deceived by him. Andrew Wakefield was struck off the UK Medical Register for his deliberate falsifications in pursuit of significant financial gain, and he was banned from practicing medicine in the UK, the most severe punishment that the GMC would have actually been able to impose upon him. Wakefield resigned from the Thoughtful House Research Center in Austin, Texas, in the wake of these new findings. But in January 2011, Wakefield continued to maintain his innocence, publicly stating,
"I want to make one thing crystal clear for the record. My research and the serious medical problems found in those children were not a hoax, and there was no fraud whatsoever. Nor did I seek to profit from our findings, despite media reports to the contrary. The results of my research have been duplicated in 5 other countries. I continue to fully support more independent research to determine if environmental triggers, including vaccines, are causing autism and other developmental problems. Since the Lancet paper, I have lost my job, my career, and my country. To claim that my motivation was profit is patently untrue. I will not be deterred. This issue is far too important."
He would go on to say that he believes he is the victim of a ruthless, pragmatic attempt to crush any attempt to investigate valid vaccine safety concerns. Brian Deere responded to these comments by saying,
"If it is true that Andrew Wakefield is not guilty as charged, he has the remedy of bringing a libel action against myself, the Sunday Times of London, against the medical journal here, and he would be the richest man in America."
Wakefield's claims that his results have been duplicated in 5 other countries are completely unfounded. On April 1st, 2011, the James Randi Educational Foundation awarded Wakefield the Pegasus Award for refusal to face reality, while Time magazine named him in a list of greatest science frauds of all time. In January 2012, Wakefield filed a defamation lawsuit against Brian Deere and the British Medical Journal for false allegations of fraud, seeking a trial in his now resident home of Austin, Texas. The British Medical Journal responded, standing by their claims and saying that they would fight them vigorously. The court filing was dismissed due to a lack of jurisdiction and was upheld on appeal in September 2014, while Wakefield was ordered to pay the legal costs for all parties involved. Since his 1998 study, many parents continue to be convinced that the MMR vaccine does have the dangers of causing autism in their children, a view that Wakefield continues to promote through the media. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the USA, more cases of measles were reported in 2008 than any other year since 1997, and more than 90% of those infected had not been vaccinated, or their vaccination status was not known. Paul Herbert, the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Medical Association Journal, claimed,
"There has been a huge impact from the Wakefield fiasco. This spawned a whole anti-vaccine movement. Great Britain has seen measles outbreaks. It probably resulted in a lot of deaths."
While the New York Times commented,
Andrew Wakefield has become one of the most reviled doctors of his generation, blamed directly and indirectly, depending on the accuser, for irresponsibly starting a panic with tragic repercussions. Vaccination rates so low that childhood diseases once all but eradicated here, whooping cough and measles, among them, have re-emerged, endangering young lives.
though Brian Deere still calls for criminal charges to be pressed against Andrew Wakefield. Wakefield continues to this day to claim that his research was valid and that he is nothing more than a victim of a government cover-up, often speaking in favour of anti-vaccine movements, appearing at anti-vaccine rallies, releasing a movie highlighting the conspiracy, and even writing a book about his experiences entitled Callous Disregard, Autism and Vaccines, The Truth Behind a Tragedy. Is Andrew Wakefield just a corrupt and disgraced doctor who sought to capitalise on fear-mongering for his own financial gains and just continues to promote his views to gain recognition and funding after his master plan was pulled out from under him? Or did he stumble across a truth that the government just don't want you to hear? Wakefield's motivations seem apparent, and his loyalty to the methodology of science seem corrupted. But there is no doubt that his actions caused a tidal wave across the scientific community and the world, leaving an entire generation of parents trying to make informed decisions about their children, still seeking answers. Hello guys, this is Rob from Seeking Answers. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. If you do want to see more, please consider donating to Patreon or clicking that join button below to become a channel member. Unfortunately, YouTube's monetization doesn't really cater to the content that we make, so we do need all the help that we can get. I also realise that not everyone is able to give a monthly payment, so there is now a PayPal link in the description if anyone does want to donate a one-off payment. Doesn't matter the amount, any amount is appreciated. And if you do a one-off payment, you'll be able to request a case for us to cover, and it will really go towards helping the channel out and continuing to grow the community. Any amount is appreciated and it will go towards keeping this channel alive and making more content, going on location more. You will get perks in exchange and you will help really give this channel the boost it needs. Thank you for all of your support and tune in next week for another video.